5 seconds to go. Start. The Parliamentary Committee report on genetically modified GM organisms is an attempt to give a quiet burial to biotechnology in India. On behalf of the farmers of India, let me say that this report totally fails to reflect farmers' aspirations and distorts the scientific significance of biotechnology, including genetic engineering, for the national economy. Instead, it echoes persistent canards by some environmental NGOs. Indian farming suffers losses of up to rupees 1 lakh crore from pests and diseases annually apart from natural calamities. Till the 1960s, India used only conventional breeding for seeds, but these traditional varieties were insufficient to feed the country, which became totally dependent for food aid from the US. Then came the Green Revolution, which harnessed biotechnology. This saved India from starvation and made it a food exporter. But the limits of the Green Revolution technology have been reached. We now have new kinds of biotechnology, including GM crops. The government has created the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee GEAC to regulate the entry of new GM crops. Unfortunately, the parliamentary committee's report seems to written for them by green activists without reference to scientists or farmers. Instead of hailing GM crops as a huge success, they are being portrayed as dangerous. This demonization will demoralize top Indian researchers. BT cotton, approved by GEAC in 2002, is one of the most successful stories of Indian agriculture after the Green Revolution. 50,000 hectares were planted in 2002, and by 2012 this reached 10 million hectares planted by 10 million farmers in 9 states. India became the second largest producer of cotton in the world. It was a boon to Indian farmers. Yet the parliamentary committee had swallowed NGOs' claims that this has been of no use at all for farmers. GM crops of maize, soya, potato, sugar, canola, cotton, and alfalfa are grown across the world. The US, Brazil, Argentina, and China are massive producers. The global GM crops area increased from 4.3 million hectares in 1996 to 148 million hectares by 2010. Not a single case of any danger to human death has been reported, yet green activists keep spreading false stories about health hazards. 10 industrial nations and 19 developing countries are producing GM crops. Another 30 countries, including EU countries, which do not grow GM crops themselves, are importing and consuming GM foods directly and indirectly. The EU countries that widely oppose GM crops have barely 15 million farmers and follow double standards. They import huge quantities of cattle feed and beef from GM crop producing countries, including Brazil. So, GM crops are very much in the European food chain. Besides, over 15 million European tourists visit the US and Latin America every year and happily consume GM food there with no adverse health effects. Yet, they make a huge noise in their own countries. But today, even the EU has allowed some GM crops. Spain, with 76,675 hectares of BT maize, is the leader. China is growing BT cotton, tomato, papaya, and sweet pepper. In 2007, it gave in principle approval for BT rice and BT maize. As of 2010, China was cultivating 3.5 million hectares of BT crops. Will sound economics, which is what the slew of much delayed measures announced by the government to boost investors' confidence amounts to, also prove to be sound politics. One answer to the question should come with the way the government has dealt with Mamata Banerjee's ultimatum. If it continues to remain firm as it has in its dealing with her, it will signal the strength of its resolve to risk its survival in office to uphold the national interest. That in turn will stymie to some extent the effort of other parties to push UPA second to the wall. The SP in particular will then think twice before it let its increasingly strident rhetoric against the Congress reach a point of no return. Even more significantly, the BJP, which championed reforms when it was in power but has now become the Pied Piper of no holds barred populism, will find it hard to sustain its fierce opposition to the government. As it is, the party's endeavor to paralyze Parliament has not gone down too well, even in those sections of opinion that have been outraged by Colgate and other scams that have dented the reputation of UPA second, possibly beyond repair. But if the government manages to ensure that the SP does not abandon it, the BJP will be in a tight spot. In fact, it will face a worse prospect should some of its allies, such as the Akalis, break ranks with it on the latest reforms package, not least because it allows states to fashion their own policies as regards FDI in multi-brand retail. This move is very much in keeping with the more pronounced and growing federal sentiment in the country. Fortune, they say, favors the brave. Battered by negative publicity at home and abroad, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has run a political risk that bears the cachet not only of courage but also of bravado. He took that risk when, in the face of stiff opposition from the CPM, he pushed through the Indo US civilian nuclear deal. The CPM that had to eat crow. This time the risk is, if anything, more severe since the new measures announced are bound to adversely impact public opinion directly, at least in the short run. And the short term more or less coincides with the time that is left before general elections are held in 2014. For a prime minister who's cautious to a fault, such risk taking must surely be rooted in hard headed calculation. With the elevation of Pranab Mukherjee to Rashtrapati Bhavan, he was able to get out of his way an opponent of the so called trickle down theory. With P. Chidambaram's re-induction in the finance ministry, he was able to neutralize, in a manner of speaking, A.K. Antony, another cabinet colleague whose enthusiasm for the reformist agenda has been less than lukewarm. Chidambaram not only backs reforms to the hilt but also shares much like Antony does, an excellent rapport with Sonia Gandhi. Stop.